Hello, everyone. This is Steven with AI Culture, where I talk with experts about how AI seems to be influencing society. And today I'm talking with a scholar who analyzes the different ways that governments try to use AI in different parts of Africa, particularly centered around security and how African countries manage security with AI. Security and AI for governments is kind of a rising thing these days. So I found the conversation really interesting and I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Damilola Adegoke. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks,
Yeah,
Steve.
yeah. So you've done a lot of work. You're around AI and peace building and security, and as a computational sociologist. Do you maybe want to give us a little bit of an overview, like what's going on in for peace building? What's going on for people who are trying to think about how to build states, and what are they doing with AI?
Yeah, I think first I would like to thank you for having me on this your program on this platform. My basic background should maybe, I want to place a template to lay foundation for this discussion upon which I would respond to your question. So the basic research question that underlies the basic question that drives my research is around how do society organize themselves in moments of conflict and cooperation. So from the angle of peace studies, I look at the broader picture of how societies organize themselves in moments of conflict and cooperation. And with my background in sociology, as a sociologist, I was always fascinated by how leadership, communication, and institution shape peace or instability. When I started working on peace building issues in Africa, I realized that many of the dynamics we were trying to understand, like how rumors spread, mobilization, distrust, social cohesion, conflict, were increasingly happening even in digital spaces. And that meant that traditional sociological tools alone were not enough. So I adopted computational sociology as a natural bridge to be able to address this gap. So it allows the use of data, networks, and computational tools to study social phenomena and social processes at scale, especially in digital environments where volumes of interactions and data exist. Going into that, with peace building, that approach also gives the normative, peace building itself originally gives a kind of normative focus, looking at how societies build stability and cooperation, while the integration of computational sociology helps to be able to provide a systematic and analytical tools to study these processes. And now to answer your questions around AI and peace building, increasingly we have been seeing the use of AI, and before AI, big data. Before that, about 10 years ago, big data was the big thing until AI emerged. Yeah, now AI influence peace building processes through about three main ways, but not restricted to those three ways. The first part is in early warning and conflict monitoring, where machine learning models are used to analyze social media data, news streams, or local report to detect signals of rising tensions. Okay, and secondly, in crisis coordination and responses, because of the data that are generated, we live in data-fied societies now, where everything about us is almost like we are like mini data sensors. So at the macro and the micro level, we've seen how we generate data, and some of these data, the advantage of that, regardless of the ethical implication, which is also not to say that those ethical implications are not worthy of concern. They are very, very important and worthy of focus as well. But during crisis coordination and response, in natural disasters, or even human conflicts, we have seen AI helping in analyzing large volumes of information, such as in using geospatial analysis, such as imagery, satellite imagery to detect, sometimes to detect genocidal claims, where people have been buried, even to do digital anthropology, where people have been maybe like you want to locate where some forensic anthropology, digital forensics, to look at where using various data points to dictate if large body of people were buried in a particular place, and also for to also map what we call deforestation, and to examine the impact of climate on the environment. So the third part is public communication analysis. AI helps organizations understand narratives circulating in society, which is crucial for addressing misinformation or polarization. However, the technology is not only useful when combined with local knowledge. It's only useful and more importantly, so when combined with local knowledge and contextual understanding. And that's why I've advocated for indigenous sovereignty when it comes to digital sovereignty in the use of AI, because AI cannot replace the human dimension of peace building. Thank you.
Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, I could definitely see some of these different cases that you're talking about, in terms of its usefulness, and I could see the complexities in terms of sovereignty. I guess that was that was a question I did want to ask you about, which was, I'm gonna phrase it in
Okay.
a little bit of a different way, which is that, like, how do we ensure control in these types of environments? So, like, I don't know if control is the right word to use here, but like, here's what I'm thinking about. So take the genocide
Okay.
example. Um,
Okay.
you could definitely see, I could definitely see a situation where a state, a
Okay.
government, is potentially committing a genocide, and
Okay.
people from outside, from other parts of the world, want to know what's happening, but the
Okay.
government isn't giving people access to the ground to understand what's going on in that local community. Like, I've seen this in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in parts of Sudan or in Ethiopia. It can be like this. They will often block up off places, and then we find out later that a lot of bloodshed occurred, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I guess in that case, the government's not in favor, but the
Okay.
people are getting from using AI to get information anyways, right? Um, I
Mm-hmm.
I could also see a situation where, like, communities are tracked via satellites and other things without their knowledge and without being able to control the data that's assembled about them. And, like, these are kind of two
Okay.
different extremes. Like, maybe monitoring genocide's good, but maybe this is bad. But, like, how do you navigate this as a computational sociologist?
Yeah. Thank you very much. What I would say is that this conversation came up at a panel that I was at last week. Yes, around yes, these are very good things, and then these are very good technologies, very fascinating, and we have seen it being used for beneficial end. But at the same time, that same technology could be used by, let's say, government that are dictatorial to invade on citizen privacy and to surveil for digital surveillance, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and to infringe on the privacy of people, and also like to trace and track dissidents, in order to stifle dissensions. Yes, so it has always been a big problem with technologies, with human interactions with technologies over time, because if you look at nearly all the technologies that we have, whether it's knife, whether it's car, whether it's airplane, we've seen the good side of it, and government also using it. I mean, not government, both state and non-state actors using them to harm people as well. So yes, so it's a very big problem. So those I'm also an advocate for open governance, and to also promote the democratization of AI, the models itself, and also data. Because why we have to be careful is that, unlike all other forms of technologies, AI is dependent on large volumes of data on people, both conversational data, private data, lots of data. that we generate out there. People using digital tools as to keep diaries of themselves. They use social media to express themselves. These can be mapped together and using various sentiment analytical tools to map and even to be able to pinpoint specifically to identify people. Even in cases where data are being anonymized, they can reverse back some of these what do you call it, gatherings, and then use that to be able to identify people. So what I can advocate, what I will continue to advocate for, and what I've always advocated is that society should be conscious of some of the disadvantages and not be carried away by the hype. Okay, I'm not a techno pessimist, but we have to recognize that AI is neither a magical solution nor is it an existential threat, but it's a powerful tool that embedded within our social and political systems. So we need to ask questions. We need questions such as whether AI is good or bad, but how societies govern and shape its use should be our major concern. So we focus on the ethical frameworks surrounding AI and regulatory institutions as well, and also advocate for more open and interdisciplinary collaboration and more civil society organizations should also demand for more digital accountability. Now we have seen people using AI even in education. We have seen AI used now even like baked into people's mobile phones without even asking them. Like almost all the communication technologies or applications that we have there, they have AI baked in. So the question should be that the human agency, the freedom of people to determine what they want and to be and also the right of people to be forgotten, not to be identified, should also be a matter of serious concern. We've seen a case, I think, in the US. I don't want to think it's anecdotal. I think about a couple of days ago, where the government, I think, demanded of some companies to remove the guardrails they put in their AI model. So it became a very serious. It led to a serious what do you call it? A serious conversation online around the power of government and the limit of the power of government to demand such things. Because now people use AI as personal diary. Some people use it for their psychological therapy. Like they ask critical questions, invasive questions, questions that are personal to them. Now you are saying that government should have the power to be able to, have access to some of these intimate moments of people. So these are things that we need to be aware of, and also there should be there should be a kind of awareness that for those who work in the area of digital advocacy and activism. There should be mass awareness and not only media literacy, even AI literacy among people to be able to understand some of the vulnerabilities surrounding some of the AI models they are exposed to. Yeah, thank you.
How, in your experience, how do governments use AI to understand what's going on in a crisis and to coordinate a response?
Yes, okay, yeah, now I get that clearly. So I would not want to give much credit to all the government have packed all of them together in the same space by saying that governments, mean that to mean that I'm going to let me say group all governments together as one entity. So not all governments. There's also, we have to be aware of these digital inequalities that it has always been there and it's still there even now. Governments with access to certain technologies, they dominate that space. They set the standard, they establish a framework and determine what should be the norms. Okay, so for those who are not within that space or who are not yet there yet, so they just have to play along. So governments in Africa, especially the world, I'm interested in I focus more on Africa and the global South. So what I observe is that anytime there is something that is going on, is when GDPR became an issue in the UK and data protection became an issue after Cambridge Analytica crisis, several governments around Europe came up with certain law to be able to prevent techno capitalists and not these big social media companies from invading the privacy of their citizens. Governments in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Africa started coming up with kind of mimicking some of these policies without necessarily understanding from my own interpretation of the process why this has to be. So, in a way, so I will not put all governments in the same basket to say yes, governments how they use AI, how they react to AI, or use AI to address what they call it crisis situation without bringing laying this out there. So, but largely governments that's those governments, I mean, with technologically advanced, or let me say, technologically developed societies, they've used AI to be able to combat to fight a lot of to be able to combat misinformation by setting up platforms where people can check fact check in quote maybe fake news and what have you, and then they've set up guidelines and policies around the limit to which some what do you call it digital companies can use data of their citizens. So they've used also they are aware of that. So that is that. But largely, for governments around the world are still at the mercy of these big companies because most of the times most of the reactions to government reacts mainly to maybe the misuse of AI by either non-state actors, the big businesses, and what have you. So because yes, so big data is essentially something that is driven by the private sector, basically. So, but they've used that in natural disaster for disaster monitoring, maybe for weather predictions. We've seen a situation where automated propaganda like use of bots are being combated, whether from some claim to be from Russia, China, what have you. And they've used that to also combat, apart from fake news, the idea of deepfakes, where people use AI to manipulate people's images for whether it's doxing or for whatever possible, for cyberbullying and other processes. So they've used that in that regard to combat crime mainly. So about the time of when COVID was a thing, digital technologies and big data were used quite all right. AI was not yet a thing at that time because AI built upon big data and maybe social media analytics and what have you. So yes, we've seen that being used for education, for mass education, even in education, to be able to like allocate resources as well and to distribute. And now what AI is even being used for in the area of health management and health crisis. So we've seen AI being used in that regards to address some of the challenges. But in Africa, we are still moving on to most governments in Africa. They are moving on into the game, but we are seeing the increasing adoption of AI, where AI is being used for education purposes. And now we have seen situations where governments also have put AI in for using for policing. In South Africa, we have seen the use of AI coupled with CCTV technologies to be able to identify and track criminals and to combat crime. In Nigeria, though very minute, but we've seen packets of AI models being developed, being used also to fight crime, though at a very minimal level, not as such. But yes, so we've seen AI being used in that regard for that positive end. At the same time, I don't want to, though I don't have that fact yet, but we've seen AI being used. Because you see, the issue is that there's a gap between AI use and government responses to the use or an abuse of AI. That is one major concern that we need to also be worried about. And also, there is also the worry that, well, some of these technologies and some of these data centers that host these models and technologies are being hosted outside of the continent. So there's an issue of digital sovereignty added to that layer as well, thereby making people to reject blind adoption of AI. Some people are calling for the rejection of that because some students, even in the Western countries now, and even in Africa, we've seen situations where students now depend heavily on AI for their assignments and what have you. So it's also affecting that independent research ability of these students. So there is also a call for platform accountability and local participation in technology design, where we have seen a little bit of research emerging in that space, asking for the model to be unpacked, rather than the models being black boxed. that should be unpacked where people understand decision making processes, how the models actually make decisions to avoid discrimination, to avoid some of the hills that are being reported around the use and abuse of AI. So, like I said earlier, governments everywhere. I don't want to isolate or a particular government for focus here. I think government everywhere needs to do more because when you look at the way people use AI now, people abuse AI on their own. They can use AI to print people's images for misinformation, and it's also help some algorithm to amplify polarizing content, creating manufactured dissent in conversations, and whereby driving the wedge between society and affecting societal cohesion. So yes, we have seen AI being used to create content, wonderful. Some people use AI to make movies, to create educational content, to make graphics, to make applications, to build applications. We've seen that in the creative industries in Africa. We've seen that use of AI. Though the fear is that that could also be used to sinister ends. So in that case, so to your question around disaster management, in early warning system, in monitoring, in tracking, in resource distribution around natural disaster or natural emergencies, we've seen the use of AI, but that use is not uniform. It's dependent on the level of each state or each country's in their what do you call it, in their phases of technological development. So that's that. Thank you.
In the African countries you've studied, you talked about how there's a gap between like the use between the government setting up regulations and then actually following through and kind of dealing with where people cross the line, right? Where people abuse the AI. What do you think it would look like for them to regulate that better? What do you think it would look like for them to, like, what do you think would be effective in addressing some of these potential abuses at the policy level?
All right. So I want to, the thing is, because like I mentioned earlier, now I'm responding now. Yes, you clearly, I mean, I pointed out earlier that there's a gap between government's response to the use and abuse of AI and how citizens also use AI, whether citizens or big companies how they use AI. So mainly, most of these responses are reactionary. They are reactive, not reactionary. They are reactive. It's usually after a major abuse or major disaster or major scandal. That's when you see government campaigning about to be able to mitigate some of the impact of the abuse of AI or what have you. It's not only in Africa, it's also it's also in most countries around the world. So yeah, but we've seen African countries, like I mentioned earlier, when I mentioned the issue of the impact of how Europe responded to Cambridge Analytica and then the GDPR in UK and several other data protection regulations in different countries in Europe. We've seen Africa also adopting that. Maybe there's a kind of colonial linkage or legacy to that. But in 2024, when people started also talking about AI abuse in different parts of the world, we've seen AU adopted a continental AI strategy to guide how African countries develop and regulate AI. Okay, the strategy calls on government to create national policies that ensure AI systems are ethical, transparent, and accountable, which are three common words used in most AI policy frameworks, while protecting citizens from harms. They've used that they should bear in mind that they ensure that AI systems are ethical, they are transparent, and they are accountable, while protecting citizens from harms such as surveillance abuse, misinformation, or discrimination. So the key priorities of the focus of that strategies was around protecting privacy and personal data, conducting risk and assessment of AI technologies that people used. In the case of Kenya, the question is around, which was something I found very fascinating when I looked at the document. They were more concerned about protecting people's information, especially as regarding to the cloud, where they were more concerned. That was one of the acts. The Kenya Data Protection Act looked at that aspect, which was something that I find very interesting because several countries in Africa were not like that granular in that regard, because some of, as we people use, they just talk about cloud, they put their data on the cloud, everybody keeps talking about cloud, without asking where are these data centers located. In some countries in Africa, they are coming up with mandatory policies to say all our data should be hosted by in data centers that are domiciled in our own space rather than outside of the continent. So they are encouraging that process as well. And that strategy also looked at developing regulations and safeguards for AI deployment, and also asking for fairness and explainability in the AI system. Remember, I said earlier that some of the models are black boxed, and the entire decision making processes behind some of these, because AI is not just AI, it's a decision making tool, okay, which impacts on a lot of things, how people make decisions, whether it's in any sphere that AI is deployed, whether it's education, whether it's education where people want to study, it guides what to study. When you ask a question, unlike the dumb internet that people used to have in the past, where you just go online, you type you type something, you search something, you search for keywords, and you get your result. In this case, when you ask, the responses are tailored based on the models. I mean, the way the model, so based on the model design of the model. So that impacts on how you make decisions and what have you, which is something that should concern most African countries in that regard. So a lot of African countries are beginning to say that, but unfortunately, the implementation is and follow up implementation and really ensuring that these particular policies in paper are created into things that will protect the rights of the citizens. Those are huge. There's a huge gap between the two processes. So yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, the Kenya Data Protection Act regulates how companies and government handle personal data, digital systems, and also AI applications. So, I think in Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, they have similar data protection frameworks. And also, one other policy I like to mention at regional level is the Malabo Convention on cybersecurity and personal data protection, which is more like the same thing. It's a continental standard for privacy and cybersecurity laws that many African states have adopted. And the law mainly provides legal tools for addressing AI abuse, so that misuse of personal data, algorithmic profiling, surveillance, and digital fraud. Yes, the paper and in theory, these laws are there, these policies are there, but whether they are implemented because whether they are implemented is another thing. Because there was something that became a scandal. There was a particular thing that a policy that was introduced where some of these technologies we ask you, okay, you can some of these AI producing countries will bring out their product into the continent. Some of them as donations to schools, to health centers, and these are data gathering softwares and devices. And they donate CCTVs to them to fight crime, laptops in some cases, and these are devices that have some of this AI baked in as part of the system. So questions should be asked around that. So I've advocated for digital sovereignty for Africa, and for that to be for AI. For securing the citizens against the abuse of AI, we start from that process. For that to be long lasting, government must ensure that some of these digital products are made, if possible, the models are made in Africa, deployed in Africa, the data centers are hosted in Africa, and the processes are guided by the citizens and by those who are on the continent. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, this is a complicated issue. I do feel like I mean, I wish it seems like it's a type of issue that everywhere in the world is trying to grapple with. I guess one other this will be my final question for you. This is another big issue, but I want to kind of hear how this gets sorted out in some of the African countries that you study. There's a lot of people who have concern about how AI could be used by governments or by political parties that are in power to reinforce their power, right? To maintain power. To what extent, like, is this, have you seen this play out in some of the different countries in Africa that you've studied, or how has AI been used to help reinforce power among like ruling parties, and what ways can it be used for like resistance or stuff like this in a democratic society or a
Yes.
democratic government?
I would not want to use AI. I mean, like, don't let me give much credit to some of these, some of the countries. I mean, some of the governments. Yeah. So I would not say that they have been using AI specifically for that end, because there are also other mechanisms for them to stifle dissension and to combat opposition, to fight opposition. Yeah. So it's not really a major thing as such, because the backbone of of the technologies that are used are not necessarily hosted on the continent, or they are not owned by Africans. So it's very difficult, only on a limited level, where they like clamp down on Twitter during protests, okay, or they use a kind of throttling approach, discriminatory throttling, where during protests specific groups of people or categories of people have their internet speed limited, so they could not be able to share internet. And there's also kind of digital geofencing that they've adopted at minimal level in countries like Tanzania during protest, and so I think during the tax bill protest in Kenya, several people have made several claims, including NGOs, around how AI has been, how digital technologies have been used. Some say including AI to be able to limit the influence of some of these the protesters. But again, we have also started seeing the emergence of pro-government bots used in attacking people online, trolling people, trolling oppositions online, though combined with human trolls as well. So that is also becoming a thing. But I also need to mention that yes, so we've seen that process in place in Africa, in the way governments have been using that. And then for what I would say, if I understood your question correctly, around how people can navigate or circumvent some of these, how protesters or people, society advocates groups can navigate some of these what do you call it, restrictions or inhibitions
Exactly.
posed by AI or digital technologies. So what I would say is that we need to go back to the traditional way. People should, because protest these days is seen as a performance, it's performative. Well, most social actions are performative anyway, but because people want to perform on the camera, they want audience, they want to farm engagement, content are being monetized. People look for where actions and events are happening, so they rage bait, they go online to be seen. So because of that, it's also a very big vulnerability and weaknesses, because people want to see. I'll be first to post that protest. Can you see my faces on camera, so that they justify why they have been there, and to create a certain image around themselves. What I think should be is that people should go back to the traditional approach, where people go on without, when you're going to protest, leave your phones at home if possible. Fine. One or two people might have, you can have journalists like documenting the processes to prevent abuse, because people have promoted the idea that, oh, digital technologies have helped uh, protesters to be able to document abuses or violence activities and what have you. They've said that a lot, but they're also forgetting the fact that the same technologies could be used to identify, the same camera could be used to identify people, protesters, and to be able to track them down. Their mobile data could be used to trace them, and their biometric data, because most of these countries have, before you can purchase SIM cards, you need to go and they will take your biometric details. I know of Nigeria, and I think some other countries as well, where you have to do that before. There are national IDs in some of these countries, so they can track and triangulate wherever you are. So people should go back to that approach and leave it as much as possible. Let the focus be on the protest rather than on the protesters, mainly. So rather than see themselves as, okay, I'm the Shigobera, I'm the Kalbaks, so you see my face there, I have this. So no. It should be on the event and focus. So that way it will limit the power of government to be able to restrict their movement in that sense. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I guess that kind of using your phone to track, it's a double-edged sword, because yes, you can use it to film like for example, instances of violence, especially police brutality and
Yes,
stuff like this. That's a
yes,
big deal in the U.S. recently, but at the same time, it can also be used to track and surveil you, improve participation.
yes.
So maybe in a movement, you need some people to do it very intentionally who take on that burden, and then other people kind of leave their phones at home. Um, that's a very good angle. I didn't really think about that. Yeah, and I know I said the last question was the final question, but I do have one more, which is that what do you see as this, as the technology develops and is both implemented in various parts of Africa, but is also changed in that process? Um, what do you see as some of the biggest concerns you have, and what do you see as some of the biggest promises?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's. I have a kind of ambivalent views regarding AI, any data technologies, any whether it's AI, whether it's social media, what have you. So I have a very mixed feelings towards that. So I'm optimistic because of the fact that so many things we could not do before, like analyzing large volumes of data set, we cannot do. Okay, we can process data like images, audio for researchers. I'm speaking as a researcher now in large volume. At the same time, we can use that. Before in the past, we had to manually tag some of our data we collect during ethnographic studies, during interviews. But now we can do that automatically. When you are, like for instance, when you use MS Teams and Zoom, there are transcription featured there that will automatically transcribe whatever the interview is saying. So that way it will lessen the burden of post-interview transcriptions, human transcription. So that way, yes. So AI is very good in that. I see more positive. I'm more optimistic in that regard. In that regard, but I'm also very, very more and even more so more concerned, really, about the negative side of AI. We've seen AI taking on independent agency, and we have seen cases where even AI models are beginning to blackmail even their developers. Even, I mean, like, which for me, that autonomy might sound more futuristic and more sci-fi, but it's becoming a very big, there's a potential threat in that regard, meaning that if you lose control of AI could replicate itself and communicate. There was even a news sometimes that I read where AI models started speaking with each other and then they created their own social network and where they discussed how to carry out a revolution and prevent human interactions. So if AI could do that, I'm very, very worried about that. So I will always continue to advocate for a man in the middle. Humans should always be in the middle of any technologies. We should not outsource our decision making power, our autonomy and process and agency to machines. So that is one area that I think we need to be worried about. Now, coming from, I mean, from the global south, okay, from the angle of the global south, I will always continue to advocate more. I think government in the global south should be worried or should be concerned and should also be very careful not to automatically adopt any technologies they see just because the West or because of some power, some technology power advising them and asking them to focus on the positive end without looking at the negative end. We've seen government in Africa, which I'm very, very, I think that one in a way I can say it should be applauded. Calling for AI regulatory sandboxes. That is, before AI are deployed in their countries, some African countries are saying they created a sandbox to test this AI for vulnerabilities, for bugs, for things before they start adopting them in their countries. So I think on the minimal level, the Communication Authority in Kenya, in Rwanda, they've carried out that policy, and Nigeria, though on the financial for fintech level, they are advocating that okay, before some of these AI applications are brought into the environment, they should be tested. So I think that approach should also be expanded to like broader, not only fintech, to broader AI deployment in their countries. Whether it's we've seen that some countries up to date don't allow the use of Facebook. I'm not saying we should go the way of North Korea or what have you, But we need to be concerned about some of these technologies, or at the same time, we can also go the way of China, where some of where local people can replicate local version of some of these AI products. So they should be locally made. The knowledge should be locally driven. One, it's also going to preserve the culture, the language, and identity of the people, rather than exposing the next generation of children to only purely Western centric, Eurocentric responses or knowledge products or output by AI models. So these are things that they call for concern that, and I think government should focus on, and citizens should also be aware of. Thank you.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I mean, I've recently had some conversations with some friends. I'm currently in Indonesia as we're doing this recording, and I had some
Okay.
conversation with some people here that share similar concerns about, these technologies are disproportionately built by very large companies that tend to be not only Western countries, but specifically in the US. Most of them are US based companies. And talking through what it might look like to kind of build more on the ground versions in specific parts of the world, because it tends to, maybe like Indonesia and different parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, it can replicate colonial relationships, and how it's
Yeah.
built and then quote unquote implemented in this area, and building it from the ground up is, I think it would be a very good idea. The devil's in the details of how, but I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I guess thanks for taking the time now. And for any
Okay.
listener, I'm going to include some links to more of his work in the description down below, for you guys to check it out. But yeah, thanks. Like I said, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.